Welcome to the 20th video in this tutorial series on building an e-commerce website using React, Redux, GraphQL, and Firebase. In today's video, we're going to be working on our checkout page. We're going to be integrating with Stripe's Payments API to securely process the payment. But before we begin, let's run through a quick demo of what you will have built by the end of this tutorial. Of course, you can click through to our search pages. Of course, we have infinite scroll, so as you can see, we can view more products. But let's add something else to our cart. Once we're satisfied, we can click on Checkout, and I'm just going to skip ahead and fill in this form. But as you can see, the user is able to enter a separate shipping address to their billing address. They can also enter, of course, their card number. Now, I am using Stripe's development API keys, which means that I am currently running a test environment on my local machine, and I can just use their test card number. So that is the following number. Once that is filled in, I can just hit Pay Now. And once the payment is successful, I'll be redirected to the home page, and my cart will be cleared. And as you can see, the payment was successful. I can see all the information about the transaction as well as the shipping information. And of course, you can also see the full payment intent, which is a huge amount of data that in upcoming tutorials we will be using to actually create and store users' order history within another Firebase collection. Before we get started, I just want to encourage you guys to check out my official YouTube channel. You can find that at youtube.com/simpletut, not only to find my other videos, but also the official playlist for this series. I also want to encourage you guys to check out the official GitHub repository for this project. You can find that at github.com/simpletut. You can find my official website at simpletut.com. But most importantly of all, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on those notifications. In this tutorial, we're going to be implementing Stripe's Payments API into our application. We're going to create a checkout form where users can enter their shipping, billing, and credit card information. And then we're going to use the React Stripe.js library to process that payment, redirect the user to a confirmation page, and then clear their cart. Now, before we get started, please do create your own Stripe account and log into your dashboard. We're going to need to get our API keys. But before we can do that, we do need to install a few more dependencies into our project, both for our Firebase Functions and for our main application. The first thing that we need to do is install the dependencies we're going to be using in this tutorial. Now, the first one is going to be React Stripe.js. Now, this is the official documentation for this library. I'll be posting a link to this in the description of this video, but you can also just search Google for React Stripe.js, and this page will come up. But again, it is on the official Stripe website, and it should be quite easy for you to find. Alternatively, you can just copy this command, which again, I'm just going to be copying directly from the documentation. So what I'm going to do is come back over to VS Code. I'm going to go into Terminal, New Terminal, and I'm just going to run the command. And this will install those dependencies into my project. So I'm just going to enter that and click on Return and let that install. Okay, so now that that's installed, I'm just going to clear down my terminal, and I'm going to install two more dependencies. The first is Axios. We're going to be using this to make asynchronous requests to our Firebase function. We're also going to need to install React Country Region Selector. And again, this is something we're going to use later on in the tutorial, so please bear with me. Let's install these dependencies and we'll talk more about them a little bit later. So I'm just going to hit on Return, and that's going to add those dependencies to my application. And that's all the dependencies we need to install for our main application. But as you know, we also have a separate application within our project for our Firebase functions. This is what we created in the last tutorial. And as you'll remember, this has its own npm dependencies and its own package.json file. So I need to actually install Stripe for my Firebase functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to navigate into my functions directory. So I'll just say cd functions. And as you can see, I'm now inside of my functions directory. And I'm just going to go ahead and npm install Stripe. At this point, we're ready to start coding. We need to create our new payment route. This is going to be the page that houses our checkout form where the user will be able to enter their shipping, billing, and card information. So the first thing we need to do is head back over to our text editor. We need to create our new page component. So within my pages directory, I'll create a new folder. We're going to call this payment. It's only going to be a functional component, so we'll just have an index.js. We're going to import React from React. It's just going to be a function, so we'll just say const payment equals a function. We're going to, at this point, we're not going to return anything until we create our component, so we'll just say export default payment. But we need to go ahead and create the component, so we're going to create a payment details component. So in the components folder, let's create another folder called payment details. This is going to have both an index file and a style sheet. So we'll say styles.scss. And in the index file, we're going to import React from React. We're going to create a const called payment details. It's a functional component, so it's just going to equal a function. And we're just going to return a div with a class of payment details. And we're going to export this by default. So we'll export payment details. And we also want to import the style sheet, so we'll say import styles.scss. And for now, that's going to be enough for us to come back over to our page component. So this is this is our payment component, and we're going to import that payment details component. We'll import that from our components folder. So we'll import that from components, payment details, and we'll just render that component for now. Now, all I need to do is actually define my route. So I'm going to come back over to app.js. This is where we define our routes. And I'm going to import my new page component, which is import payment from pages/payment. And what we want to do is just underneath where we define our cart route, we're going to create another new route. The path is just going to be /payment. We're going to call the render prop. And what we're going to do is define our layout. So we're going to define main layout. And we're just going to pass in our payment component. Okay, so at this point, we've created our basic page component and our payment details component. And this component is the one that we're going to be building our forms into. So this is where we are going to actually render out a checkout form where the user can enter their shipping, billing, and card information. So the first thing that we need to do is just build out that form, right? So to do that, what I'm going to do is reuse some components we wrote in an earlier tutorial in this series. And that's our shared forms components. So in my components directory, we have this folder called forms. And in a tutorial earlier in this series, we created our form input and button components. Well, we're going to use that here, right? So at the top of our payment details component, we're going to import our form input. We're going to import that from forms/form input. And then, of course, we want to import our button component. So we'll import that from, again, forms/button. And then what we'll do is we'll wrap this in a form. So I'm just going to create a form. And on the onSubmit event, we're going to call a function. So we'll say const handle form submit. This is going to be async. It's going to take the event. And all we're going to do now is we're just going to capture that event and call prevent default. And that's going to stop the page from reloading whenever this form gets submitted. So we just need to pass that to our onSubmit event. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap. So this form is going to be divided into 3 sections, right? So we have shipping. We're going to have another section for our billing and another section for our card details. So I'm going to create a div here. And I'm going to give this the class of group. And I'm going to have a h2 inside of that. And we're just going to call this shipping. Let's duplicate this for each of those sections. So we're going to have another area for billing and another one for card details, right? So maybe shipping address and shipping address. So billing and shipping address and card details. Now under the H2, we're going to have our form components. So now we're not going to worry about our state just yet. We just want to get the initial form in place. So let's just create our form, our basic form input. Let's just specify the type, which is going to be of type text. Let's specify the placeholder, which for this is going to be recipient name. Then what I want to do is just duplicate this a couple of times. So we're going to duplicate it for line 1, right? So the line 1 of the user's address. We want to duplicate this for line 2, if there is one. We need it for city, state, and postal code. So I'm just going to create another one here for city, another for state, and another for postal code, right? And then I want to have the same fields apart from recipient name. In fact, I'll take that too. I'm just going to copy all of these fields. So all of these form inputs I just created for shipping, and I'm going to put them into billing, right? Because we basically need the same fields. But apart from this placeholder for billing being recipient name, we're going to change this to name on card, right? And then finally, we're not going to worry about card details just yet because we're going to be using a Stripe component for our card field. But what we can do now is just view this page in the browser. So what I'm going to do is just going to manually enter /payment into the URL, hit return, and we're going to be able to see our forms and our payment details component, right? So it's looking pretty good. But what I will say is that we do need to add a little bit of styling in, because for one, you can see that there's no margin above our H2, so we're directly sitting on the header here. And really we need some gaps between the groups. So what we can do is just come back over to the style sheet for payment details. We created and imported into our component. We added this payment details class here. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to target it. And I'm just going to set some basic settings here. So I'm going to set this to be display block with a width of 100%. Let's set a max width of something like 1000 pixels. Now again, I'm using rems here, which you will know if you followed the series, which means root ems. Now because my root font size is 10, to calculate the rem size, I just have to divide that number by 10. So in this case, it's 100.0 rem, which is 1000 pixels. We're going to set the padding here. We're going to reset that to 0. and we're just going to set a margin here of about 20 rem, which is 20 pixels top and bottom, and auto right and left. We're then going to target the group class we created and assigned to those sections, and we're just going to add a margin here, top and left and right 0, but we're going to add 20 rem, which is 20 pixels, to the bottom right. So let's come back now over to the web browser, and you're going to see that again, this is just slightly improved the page visually, and that's great. Now, unfortunately, we are still missing one field for our addresses, and that is the user's country. Now, you will have noticed at the start of the tutorial when we installed new dependencies, one of those new dependencies was React Country Region Selector, right? And this is just going to be a really easy way for us to add a drop-down component to our forms for the user to select a country, right? And you can see this is a really great little library that has some really nice options. It's just very easy for us to use this. And that's why I've incorporated it into our project. And I'm going to show you how to use that now. So let's go ahead and add that into our page. So the first thing we'll do is just come back over to our text editor. We need to come back to our payment details component. And at the top of the file, we're just going to import something from React Country Region Selector, which is our country dropdown, right? And then what we're going to do is wherever we want to render that, so we want to render that for our shipping and billing address, what we're going to do is we're going to just render our component, right? But we need to pass some custom props. So the first thing is the value type. We want this to be the short option. So we'll say value type equals short. And this is just going to mean that rather than saying United States, it's just going to, or Great Britain, it's going to say GB, which is what Stripe will expect on their API. Now we are going to have a few more things to configure here, but for now, that's fine. But what I will do is I'm going to just save this and come back over to the browser and show you what this looks like. So as you can see, we do have the field. I can click and expand it, and you can see we have all the countries. So you can kind of get the idea of why I wanted to use another library for this, because imagine trying to maintain this component yourself. It's not going to be very easy. But there is a problem. The problem is that it doesn't match the styling of the rest of our form. So there's going to be a really easy way for us to fix that. So what we'll do is come back over to the text editor. Let's go into our form input component here. And what you'll see is we have a class defined here for form row. So I'm just going to come back now to my payment details component. And I'm going to wrap this in a div with a class of form row. And I'm just going to wrap that component with that div. But I am going to add an additional class, which is going to be checkout input. And then we can come back over to the style sheet for our form input, which is here. And what I'm going to do is, rather than just targeting an input type, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a comma. I'm going to use the and symbol. And I'm going to say if this has an additional class, so I'm talking about form row, if it has an additional class of checkout input, then go into target the select within that and apply the same styling. So we can now come back over to my form, and you can see that the style is inherited, and this is much more in line with what we have on our other fields, which is great. Okay, so we just need to duplicate that now for our billing address, because we're going to need a country select there too. So let's add that in here underneath postal code for billing. Okay, so now that we have configured our basic form components, we're ready to start creating our state. So to do that, we're going to have to import something from React, which is the use state hook because this is a functional component. And then we need to define that state. So rather than individually setting state for each of the fields within our address, I'm going to create a basic object that we can use to handle both shipping and billing, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this. So we're going to say billing address and set billing address. We're going to call the use state hook. And for now, we're just going to pass in an empty object. We're going to do the same thing for our shipping address. So we'll say shipping address and set shipping address. And again, we're going to call the use state hook. Now, the only other two pieces of state that we need to create is for recipient name. So we'll say recipient name and set recipient name. And this is just going to be a simple string. So we'll say use state, and we'll just specify that as a string as an initial value. And then finally, we need to set the name on the card. So we'll say name on card and set name on card. And again, this is going to be a simple string. So we'll just say use state and define that initial value as an empty string. Now, of course, this field is going to have more than one value, more than one key on this object. So what I'm also going to do here is just define an initial address object. So we'll say const initial address state. And we need to do this because otherwise you will see console errors for your form components changing uncontrollably. So we need to define a basic line 1 here. We'll define that as an empty string. We'll say line 2, define that as an empty string. We have city, state, and I believe country, and postal code. Which are all going to be empty strings. And then we're just going to use the spread operator to pass that in to our state for our addresses. Okay, so now that we've created that state, we can bind that to our actual input fields for the appropriate fields, right? So for example, for our recipient name, we can set the value to be that of the recipient name. For line 1 of our shipping address, we can set the value to be shipping address dot line 1. We can do the same thing for each of these fields. So we can do that with line 2. With city, we can do the same thing. So we'll say city. We'll do the same thing for state. So here we'll say state. Again, for postal code, so we'll just say postal code. And then finally, for even our country dropdown, we'll say value, and that is going to equal our country. We're going to need to do the same thing for billing. So here, again, the value is going to be set on this occasion to name on card. Then the value for this is going to be value. This is going to be our billing address dot line 1. So then we can copy this and just use that throughout our form. So we'll replace line 1 with line 2. Then we need to set this as city. We need to do it for state. And finally for postal code and for country. Okay, so at this point we've successfully binded the values of our form inputs to the values that we're storing within our state. But we're not updating that state whenever a user changes or inputs makes a change. So just see that in the browser. Let's come back over. And let's actually try and type in one of these fields, and you'll see that you can't because we're not handling that change event. So to handle that, what we need to do is we need to assign, first of all, the name to each of these form inputs. So we need a name attribute for each of these fields. So we're saying name is recipient name, line 1, we're going to assign that to line 1. We'll do something similar here for line 2. We need to assign it for city, so we'll say name equals city. The name for our state is just going to be state. Postal code. It's very important that the name matches the name you assigned your state. So in this case, postal code needs to match here for the name. And you'll see why shortly. We don't need to worry about our country dropdown. Again, name on card, so we'll say name. It's going to be name on card. We need to do it again for line 1 here for billing. So name is line 1. Line 2. City. State. Postal code, again, needs to match. And again, we don't need to worry about our country dropdown. Now, the way that we handle the change events for our name on card and recipient name state is going to be different to how we handle our addresses. The reason is that our addresses is an object, right? So it could actually be any one of these fields that we want to change at any one time. But the functions and the methods that we're going to call here for our recipient name and name on card, it's just a string. So we're only ever updating this. So that's going to be a little easier. We can handle that first. So let's tackle our recipient name on our shipping address first. So what we're going to do is we're going to call handle change on our form input component, right? And if I just go into the form input component, you'll see that handle change is just passed to our input field on the onChange event. So what that means is we're going to get an event, right? So we'll get the event, and then we're going to call the set recipient name method with the event.target.value, and that will update the state, right? And we can do something similar for our name on card for our billing address. So down here, what we'll do is we'll say handle change, still the same component, same prop. We're going to get the event, then we're going to call set name on card with the event target.value. Right, now if I was to save those changes, come back over to the browser, you'll see that I'm now able to type in these fields, right? But I still can't type in my address fields. So what I'm going to do is come back over to the code, and I need to figure out how I'm going to handle this, because I need to be able to change any one of these fields that we have on our billing and shipping address objects. So to do that, I'm going to actually create a method, a function. So we're going to say const handle shipping first of all, right? This is just going to take the event, and then we're going to destructure from that event from the event dot target, right? So we want to destructure the name and value from the target. And then what we want to do is call set shipping, right? And then we're going to use the spread operator to pass in any of the initial or the current state. But we're going to update the current name, right? We need to put that in brackets because it is a dynamic value. And then we're going to just set the new value. right? So we need to do the same thing for billing. So what we'll do is we'll say const handle billing, right? Again, it's going to take the event. We're going to destructure name and value from the event.target, and then we're going to call set billing address, right? Again, we're using the spread operator to pass in the current billing address, and we're going to update the name with the value this function received, and we destructured from the target. So now that we've created these two functions, we can use them to update our state. So on line 1, what we're going to do for our shipping address form fields, right? So for line 1, we're just going to call handle change. We're going to get the event, and then we're just going to call handle shipping, right? And the nice thing here is we can literally just paste this to each of our fields. So we can paste that to line 2, to city, to state, to postal code. We don't need to make any changes. And then for our billing, right? So for line 1, what we're going to do is again say handle change. We're going to get the event, but this time we're going to call handle billing, and we're going to pass in the event. But then again, we can just copy this to each of these fields. So city, state, and postal code, right? So now let's come back over to the browser and try and change the content on this form. So we'll say here Joe blogs. We'll say first lane. You can say whatever here. Maybe skip that, etc., etc. So example. So you can see that all of this is now working, but unfortunately we still can't change our country. So we still need to do a bit of work on our country field. So let's just finish this off by coming back over to our code, and let's start off with shipping. So this is our shipping form, and what we want to do is on our country dropdown, we've already assigned the value. So all we need to do now is just set the onChange event. So we're going to call onChange, and what we want to do is we want to get the value. So we'll just say val, and then we're going to call handle shipping, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to set the target and the name. We're going to set the name to country and the value to be val, right? And then we can just take this code, right? And we can come down and we can paste that into our country dropdown for billing. But instead of calling handle shipping, we'll call handle billing. We'll save that, come back over to the browser. Let's reload the page, and now let's try and select a different country, and you'll see that you can now see that the countries are being selected, and that's for both billing and shipping. It's working for both. Okay, so at this point we've built our checkout form and we're ready to start working with Stripe and integrating the payments API. So to do that, to get started, we need to head over to our Stripe dashboard. We need to log into our account. We need to find our API keys. So once you're in your dashboard, click on Developers and API Keys. And what you're going to see is your publishable key and your secret key. You're going to need to copy both. Now the first one I'm going to copy here is my publishable key. And this is what we'll use on the front end of our application, right? So it's okay for this key to be exposed to the public. Now, once you've copied that, let's come back over to our text editor. And what we want to do is actually store this key in a configuration file. So within my source directory, I'm going to create a new folder called Stripe. And I'm just going to create a file inside of this called config.js. And all I'm going to do here is just going to export const publishable key equals, and I'm going to paste my publishable key here as a string. And what I'll now be able to do is come back over to my pages component, right? So this is my payment component. So we want to import, first of all, something from at Stripe Stripe.js, which is going to be elements. And then we want to import something else from the core Stripe library, so it's just Stripe.js, and we want to import load Stripe. And then finally we want to import our publishable key, which we have stored, which we've stored in that config file. So that's outside of this folder. It's in stripe/config, and it is our publishable key. And then all we need to do is we need to wrap our payment details component with elements. And outside of our payment function, I'm going to create another const here. We're going to call this our Stripe promise, and that's just going to equal load Stripe. We're going to call that and pass it our publishable key. And then finally, all we need to do is pass Stripe promise as Stripe to elements. Now, all we need to do to render our Stripe's card component is head over to our payment details page. At the top of this file, we need to import the wrapper that Stripe has provided for us. So we'll import that from Stripe and the React Stripe library. We need to import our card element. And then at the bottom of this file, where we have our card details, I'm just going to render the card element. Now, I also want to configure some options on this component. So I'm going to pass a configuration object to the options prop. Now I do need to configure that. So above here, just above where I'm returning, I'm going to say create a const called config card element, right? And this is just going to contain a few custom options, which I'm not going to go into too much because I don't think it really is too relevant here. But feel free to check the documentation of how you want to configure this. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the icon style. I'm going to set this to solid. I'm going to just generally set some style attributes here, right? So what I want to set here is the base style, which is going to be font size. I'm going to set that to 16 pixels. And also I want to disable the postcode. So I'm going to say hide postal code. I'm going to set that to true. And that's all I want to configure here. So I'm going to take that configuration object and pass that to my card element. I can save those changes. And if I scroll down, you'll see that I now have my card component. At this point, we are now ready to start to actually handle the Stripe payment, right? So what we have is we have our form, and on the submit event of that form, we call handle form submit, which is this function here, which captures the event and is async, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to get our card element. We need to store that in a constant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to need to import something else from React Stripe.js, which is use elements. And then at the top of my function, my component, I'm going to say const elements equals use elements, and I'll call that as a function. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to come here. I'm going to say const card element equals elements dot get element card, right? So that will give us our card component, which is what we just added to our form here, right? Okay, so we're now ready to actually validate our form data. So what I'll do is I'll just create an if statement. And what we want to check for is our shipping address line 1. Usually line 2 is optional, so I'm going to leave that out, but I will say shipping address dot city if we don't have our shipping address, state if we don't have our shipping address dot postal code or country, right? If we don't have it, then we want to immediately return out of this function, right? So we don't want to go any further. Now, of course, that's just our shipping address. We want to do the same thing for our billing address. So we'll say billing address dot line 1. Again, we don't need line 2 really, so I'll leave that out. But we want to say billing address city billing address state billing address postal code and country. And then finally, we also want to validate that we have the recipient name and the name on card state, right? So we're basically validating that we have all of the form data that we expect to successfully check out, right? Now, of course, this is programmatically going to be a guard to ensure that we never try to process a payment without this data. But of course, this doesn't prevent the form from being submitted, which would be ideal. So in addition to the other props that we've passed to our form inputs, I'm going to add an additional prop which is going to be required. Right, now let's just add that to each of these here. Right, so we'll go through, we want to add that. We don't really need it on line 2, so I'll leave that out. That's optional. City, state, postal code, and even on our country dropdown, right? We'll do the same for billing address, so name on card, line 1. Line 2 is optional. City, state, postal code, and our country dropdown, right? And again, if I now come back over to the browser, if I was to try and submit this form, all right, which I can't do because I haven't got a button yet. So again, let's just head back over to the code. At the bottom underneath my form element, right here, let's add in a button. Again, that was the component we imported earlier of type submit. And again, as you can see up here, we imported our button component. So let's again view this in the browser. You see we have our button. Forgot to add my text, so I'm just going to add in some text here. Right, so I'm just going to say pay now. Come back to the browser, you can see there we go. If I was to try and hit pay now, you'll see that we just get the basic HTML5 form validation. So it won't allow this form to be submitted without the correct data. Okay, so now that we've added a guard into our handle form submit function, we're ready to actually handle the payment creation. And this actually needs to occur on the back end, right? For security reasons, we're going to be doing this using our Firebase function, right? So we need an API that we can post to. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run my Firebase function. So if I come into my functions directory, which we created in the last tutorial, into index.js, you'll see that we've deployed an Express app to our Firebase function. And at the moment, all we have is our basic catch-all 404 route, right? So we need to create a new route for our Firebase function. But before we do that, let's just run this locally. So to do that, let's go into our terminal. I'll say new terminal. we need to navigate inside of our functions directory. So I'll just say cd functions. And I'm just going to run npm run serve. Hit return. And what that will do once it spins up is it will actually run our Firebase function locally for us, but it will also give us the URL that we can post to. So you can see here it says localhost port 5001, the name of the Firebase project, and the API itself. So if I was to, for example, just hold down command and click that, this will actually take me to that API. This is my Firebase function. It's running locally at this URL. So I can then copy that URL and we can use that to test and run our project locally. Okay, so now that we have our Firebase function running locally and we know the URL of our API, we can make an asynchronous request to it. But before we can do that, we need to create an instance of that API we can use in the application. And I'm going to do that using Axios. I'm going to come into my utils here. So in my source directory, I have utils index.js. At the top of the file, I'm going to import Axios, right? So I'm going to import Axios from Axios. And then I'm going to create an instance of my API by just saying export const API. You can call it API instance, right? And then you can just say axios.create. And we need to set the base URL to the path of our Firebase function API. Now this is the URL that we're running locally. Obviously, if you are going to deploy this to production, you need to make sure you update this base URL with the production URL to your API. But for now, as you know, we're running this locally in development mode, so this is fine. So now that we've created the instance and we're exporting it, we can import that in our payment details component. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll import that from my utils folder. So I'll come out into utils and we're going to import that API instance. And then within my handle form submit function, right, we've already validated, we've validated the form data. So I can just post that data, right? So I can call API instance.post, and the first thing it expects is where we're posting. So it already knows the API instance, so it already knows this is a path to the API, but it needs to know the route that we're posting to. So we haven't created that yet, but I can tell you what we're going to create, which is payments/create. Right? Now, after you've done that, what you need to do is pass the data, which we're going to configure here. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to pass the amount, right? So we need to know what the amount that we expect the user to pay. Now, we don't currently know what that is within this component, right? So we actually need to fetch that because that's currently in our Redux store. So first of all, we need to import our selectors. So we're going to import that from our Redux folder /cart selectors. We need to import our select cart total. We need to import something from reselect, which is create structured selector, and then from Redux, right? So we'll just say from React Redux, right? We need to import the use selector hook. So then all we need to do is use what we just imported. So we'll create our structured selector. So we'll say const map state equals create structured selector. We're going to set the total to be the select cart total. And then all we'll do within our component here is call use selector, pass it our map state, structured selector, and then we'll destructure the total amount. And then all we'll do is come down again to our API instance where we're posting to our backend, and we're gonna set the total times 100 because it expects it in cents. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to pass it the shipping address. So this is just going to be shipping. It's going to be an object. We're going to pass the name, which is going to be recipient name, and then address, which is lowercase, and we're just going to use a spread operator to pass in the shipping address object that we've stored in our local state. What we can then do is we can just call then and for now we'll just destructure from data the client secret, which is what that will return, right? And we're going to handle that from there, right? But what we're currently doing is we are posting to our Firebase function, to specifically the payment/create route, and we're sending them the data that we have stored on our front end, which is the amount and shipping. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is come into our Firebase functions and go into our Express application and create our route. So the first thing we need to do is just require Stripe. So we'll just say Stripe, right? Just say Stripe equals require Stripe. We then need to call that and pass it our secret key. So we can get our secret key very easily. We just need to come back over to our dashboard. We need to click this button for our secret key and then copy it. Come back over to our code and just paste that in as a string. Okay. So once we've done that, we can save that change. We can actually use it. So we can create our new route. So this route is going to be called /payment/create, right? We're going to get the request object and the response object, and then we're going to have a try catch. Right? We'll get the error here. Now, if there is an error here, what we're going to do is we're going to call res. We're going to set the status to a 500 error JSON, and we'll just pass in the status code of 500 with the message equals the error dot message, right? Something like that. And then what we'll do for actually trying to process this payment, right? So we already know on the front end we're sending the amount and the shipping address. So we'll just destructure that from the request.body, right? So we want to get the amount and the shipping address, right? And then what we need to do is create a const of our payment intent. So we'll say const payment intent, right, equals await. So this needs to be async. Right, async await, right, and then we call Stripe dot create. Stripe Stripe payment intents dot create, and then what we need to do is pass in shipping. We need the amount, and we need the currency that we want this to be transacted in, which is for me going to be USD, which is US dollar. Then once we've done that, what we want to do is send that back to the front end. So we'll say res status I'll move that to another line, so dot status of 200, which is okay, and success. And then we'll say send, and what we want to send back is the payment intent dot client underscore secret, right? And we can save those changes. Okay, so now that we've done this, we're ready to come back over to the front end of our application and handle the rest and process the rest of the payment. So what we can do is come back over to the source directory, components, and component details here. And as I said before, we're going to get back the client secret, right? So what we can then do on the front end is call Stripe, right? So to get Stripe, what we need to do is here we need to call import the use Stripe hook, and then the same way we got elements, we can say const Stripe equals use Stripe, call that as a function. We now have access to the Stripe object. And then what we can do is we can call Stripe here and create payment method. And then we need to configure that, right? So we're going to say type is of card. The card itself is going to be our card element here, which we've already assigned to our card element constant here. We're storing that in this variable. We need to set the billing details, right? Which again, we already have because we have our name, which is the name on card, right? We're storing that in state. And for the address, right, we already have the address, which is we can use a spread operator and pass in the billing address. And that's all we need to do. So we can then call .then, right? And again, from this, we can destructure the payment method, right? Because that's what that's going to give back to us. It's going to give us our payment method. And then we can actually just go ahead and process the payment at this point. And we're going to need both our client secret and our payment method. So to process the payment, we just call Stripe dot confirm card payment. So confirm card payment. We need to pass in our client secret, and then we need to pass in our payment method, which again we have with our payment method dot ID, right? And then to actually get and then what we can do is we can just call then, and we can get the payment intent, right? And this is basically all the details about the transaction if it's successful. So for now, we can just console log out our payment intent, right? So let's just log that out to the console. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that you have some items in your cart. And then let's come back over to our payment route. So we'll just say payment. And I'm just going to enter something like Joe blogs. So for the test code, right? But for the test code, we want to use this. Again, we're using the test APIs. So we can use Stripe's test codes. So we just say 4242, 4242, 4242. Again, because this is just a fake code that Stripe provides in their documentation, that as long as you're using the development API keys, this will work. So you can test your payment gateway. All right, so let's run this. Let's first of all, let's open up our network tab and click on Pay Now. And as you can see, we're getting an error. Okay. So it's just saying that we're getting a 404. Okay. So let's check out our code. And I can already see the problem. So within my Firebase function, it's the HTTP protocol. I used GET. We're making a POST request. So let's just save that, come back over, And let's try that again. Pay. Okay. And as you can see, so this error was from before, but this is our payment intent. So the payment was successful. And if I dove into the information here, you'd actually see the details about the payment, but we can actually do that from our Stripe dashboard. So let's come back over to our Stripe dashboard. Let's go to Home, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see that this was the payment that we just processed. You can come down and see, if you click on Payments, you can see more information about this payment transaction, the amount. If you scroll down, you'll see some more information about, so here, for example, is your shipping address. You can see example that we added into the payment form, the checkout form. And again, this is your event data. So this is all of the data about the transaction that you just processed. You can see all of the lines of the code here. And again, we may use this in a later tutorial when it comes to creating our order history, by saving some of this data to a Firebase collection where we can store the user's order history. So it can be very, very useful. Okay, so at this point we've created our checkout form. We're able to even integrate with Stripe's Payments API. We're processing the payment successfully. But what we want to do now is take a bit of a step back and think about the basic user experience, the workflow that we are currently sending the user through. So the first thing that we want to change is we want to restrict access to this page. Users should only be able to make payments if they are logged in. We also need to update the checkout button on our cart so that it links to actually make to this payment page. And once the payment has actually been successful, we want to clear the user's cart and redirect them to either a confirmation page or maybe the home page. So let's make a start, and that will be very easy for us to achieve. So we need to come back, first of all, to our code. Let's just close these files. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back into our app.js. And all we're going to do is we're going to wrap our payment route, our page component here, with auth, which again is a component that we created in an earlier earlier tutorial from this series. And that's all we need to do to restrict access to that page. So if I now come back over to the browser, you'll see that I'm not able to get to that payment route. If I was to go in payment, I'm redirected to log in, right? So I have to be logged in to see that route. The second thing that we need to change is we need to make sure that we are linking to that page. So let's come over to our cart. We can get there through components, and it is our checkout component, which is here. And we have our button here to check out. So what we need to do is we need to import something from React Redux. So we already have our history, right? So we can just use that to push the user to the payments route. So on the onClick event, right, what we're going to do is we're just going to call history.push and push them to /payment, right? So if you come back over, I'm logged in now. If I was to go to my cart and hit checkout, right, I am redirected here and I can view the page because I'm logged in. Now if I logged out, right, and I come to my cart and hit checkout, I'm just redirected to log in, right? So that's a pretty good user experience, really. The next thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that whenever a user does check out successfully, that we clear their cart and we redirect them to either, as I said, a confirmation page or let's say the home page. So to do that, we actually need to create a new action within our Redux store. So within our Redux folder, within cart and my cart types, I'm going to create a new type, which is going to be clear cart, and the value is going to be the same name of the key. And then we need to come over to my cart actions and create the corresponding action. So we'll just say export const export const clear cart. It's just going to be simple action, well, function that returns an object with a type, which is going to be the cart types dot clear cart. And then we can just come over to the reducer. And again, so this is my cart reducer. If I come down, create a new case, so cart types dot clear cart, and then we'll simply return, right? We're just going to return the state with, using the spread operator, our initial state. So then what we can do, right, is if I now, so we now have the action, the Redux action to clear the cart, right? So if I now come back to my payment details component and I go into this file, right, what I can do is where I import at the top of the file use selector from React Redux, I can import use dispatch, and then I can get access to dispatch, right, the same way that I got access to the state. So what I can do is I can say use, I can say const dispatch equals use dispatch, right? So I have access to dispatch. I need to also import the action, right? So I can import from my actions. So within Redux /cart actions, I can import clear cart. And then I can come down, and where before I was logging out my payment intent, I can go dispatch and I can dispatch my clear cart action, right? So that's going to clear the cart, but it's not going to redirect the user. But we only want to redirect the user once we know the cart has been cleared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to the top, and where I'm importing my select cart total selector, right? I know I also have a selector here for the select cart items count. So I'm actually going to import that as well. And then what I'm going to do, where I'm creating my structured selector here, I'm going to say item count, right? And then I'm going to be able to access item count the same way I access total, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the use effect hook. I'm going to call the use effect hook on the component. So I'll say use effect. That's going to take a function. It's going to take a dependencies array. And then I'm going to perform a check, right? I'm going to perform a check. I'm going to say if the item count, right, is less than 1, then I want to call history.push, and sorry, not push state, I want to push, and I want to push them to, let's say, the home page, right? Or it could be any page. It could be a confirmation page. And I'm just going to pass in the item count into the dependency array so that whenever this changes, this code is going to rerun, right? So what's going to happen is once a user successfully checks out and has made the payment, we're going to dispatch this action to clear the cart. Once the cart is cleared, this item count is going to change because it's going to change to 0. If it's less than 1, which will be true, we're going to push the user to the home page. Okay, so now let's come back into the browser. And as you can see, we're getting an error because we actually don't have access to history on payment details. So that's going to be really easy to fix. We're not importing anything from React Router DOM, so we need to do that. So let's import from React Router DOM the use history hook. We're going to get access to history by just calling const history equals use history, call that as a function, and that gives us access. So let's then run that in the browser. You can see it's working. Okay, let's come back over to the cart. So as you can see, I have items in the cart. Let's change the values. Let's just say £20. So change that to 1. Okay, let's check out. So I'm going to click on checkout. Okay, it's telling me I need to log in, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. So I'll say admin@admin.com, enter the password. Let's log in. Okay, let's come back to the cart, check out, enter in some information. So again, let's just say Joe blogs. Okay, so I've just skipped ahead and I've entered in the form. So as you can see, I have still one item in the cart. I've filled in the form. I'm going to click on pay. Again, I'm using the development API keys for Stripe. So I'm using the test card that they provide, which is just a card number of 424242, etc. So let's click on pay and let's see what happens. So I click on pay. The payment's successful. My cart has been cleared, as you can see, and I've been redirected to the home page. If I come back into my Stripe dashboard, let's go home, and you're going to see if I scroll down, I now have 70. If I look at payments, so this payment of £10 or dollars was successful, and you can see all of the information about that payment here. And that brings us to the end of this video tutorial. I want to thank you guys for watching, but before we sign off, I just want to encourage you guys to check out my official YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/SimpleTut, not only to find my other videos, but to find the official YouTube playlist for this series. This is just a great place for you to find previous and future videos of this series, and I'll be posting a direct link to this in the description of this video. Of course, I also want to remind you that at the end of each of these tutorials, I am committing my code and creating PRs. So if at any point you want to compare your code with mine, or maybe just clone the entire project, then you can absolutely feel free to do that. And again, I'll be posting a link to it in the description of this video. Why not check out my website at simpletut.com? But most importantly, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on those notifications.